This is another response to Varioblast's DoNotDogfeck challenge, as I'm starting to think of it, which is about alternative explanations for complex human behaviour other than evolutionary psychology and genetics. And the first one of these I talked about Freud and polymorphous perversity. Yesterday I was talking about bipedalism, the fact that we're animals that walks on its hind legs, and all of the various consequences that flow out of that, and how that might lead to the development of a life form which is uniquely adaptable and which undergoes change during its lifetime, as well as over genetic time and evolutionary time. And I just want to pick up on that because I was listening to Radio 4 last night, actually, on the iPlayer. And there's a great show on Radio 4 called In Our Time, to Melvin Bragg, which is this show. It's on twice a week. It's recorded and played back twice a week, where they just take on kind of philosophical and historical and scientific ideas and get a panel of experts to discuss them. It's one of the kind of flagship high points of Radio 4. It's brilliant, and I'll put the link to it in the info box here. But this one was about the infant's brain. It was a great bit of synchronicity, actually, that it just happened to be on. The infant brain, and what they were basically saying there is, just to reiterate what I said in a sense, that the infant brain, it doesn't come into the world as a blank slate. It's not that, but it comes into the world with a kind of first draft version of what a mind is, and that gets overwritten, in fact has to be overwritten, by all kinds of cultural and social and interpersonal experiences and physical and sensory experiences, in order for the infant to be kind of fully cognitively developed and to survive as an adult. And what it was saying in this thing is that, well, it was talking about Piaget, actually. Piaget, the child psychologist, mid-20th century child psychologist, very influential guy. And he was kind of writing before the cognitive revolution, so before all the developments in neuroscience that have happened since. But he was identifying developmental programs in young children and how they change over time and how they develop. And it was fascinating, actually, because he was talking, well, they were talking about things like object permanence. Object permanence is that sense that we have, well, it's kind of knowledge that we just walk around the world with, that the things that we see aren't going to go away every time we turn around. Like this tree over here, beautiful rose tree. You know, I can see the tree. If I turn my back to the tree, I know it's there, you know, and I know it's there because I have this strong sense of object permanence, that everything's got to be somewhere, and the tree is there. But Piaget devised a series of experiments to kind of demonstrate. I know they've been qualified since, but to kind of demonstrate that young children, infants, certainly between the age of kind of 0 and 2 years old, have an incomplete sense, or perhaps in some cases no sense at all, of object permanence. I can kind of remember this from myself when my kids were little. If they're really small, and you've got something they like, you know, a brightly coloured object or something like that, and they'll follow it around. You know, if you wave it, they'll follow it around. But if you hide it under a pillow, they'll just kind of forget it. They'll just, you know, it just seems to have disappeared from the horizon of their consciousness. It's just not there at all anymore. And a little bit later on, perhaps maybe 1.5, about 1.5, 2 maybe, really, they'll have like a partial sense of object permanence. So if you do the same thing, if you do the funny object and put it under a pillow thing, they'll go to the pillow and expect it to be there because they know that that's where it's gone. But if it's not there, then it's disappeared. It's just not in the world anymore. So things are either visible or in the place that they're expected to be. If they're not those places, then they don't exist, kind of. So that was the second stage. And then the third stage, which is the one I guess we all have as adults, is that we kind of know that everything's got to be somewhere. And if you do the same thing with the object, hide it under a pillow, the kid will go and look under the pillow, and if it's not there, they'll start searching around the place, or they'll come and smack you for playing a trick on them, or something like that. So they've got a fully developed sense of object permanence. And so, in other words, the construction of their mind, of their consciousness, is not formed in the embryonic development stage by the operation of kind of genetic programs. It's formed out there in the world through interaction and experience and sensory engagement and and moving around in the world. It has to happen in that context. As I say, it has to happen in that context. If it doesn't, things go wrong. I mean, as far as I know, no one's done the experiment of preventing a child from having those kind of object relationships, because obviously ethical problems. But there are experiments that's been done on animals with kind of parallel processes, in which if some animals aren't subjected to certain kinds of sensory experiences, or are subjected to the wrong kinds of sensory experiences at a young age, then they simply don't develop that part of their cognition, or they develop it incorrectly. And you can kind of imagine that, you know, if you could imagine, it's like strapping a child down and not letting them move for the first 4 years of their life while the brain's pruning itself and all the dendrites are forming back, so there's a bit of topiary going on to get your brain in the right shape. If you could imagine like preventing a child from having any experience with objects, not touching them, walking past them, not hiding them, not finding them, all that kind of stuff, in all likelihood they'd end up with a broken psyche. They wouldn't develop the object consciousness and the idea of permanence of objects. And what's true of object permanence is probably true for lots of other things as well. You know, social factors, perceptual factors, different kinds of engagements with the world, really. You know, you do have to be in the world to develop the cognition of the world. That's the take-home message, I think, of this show on Radio 4. What I read, so this wasn't in the show yesterday, but what I read elsewhere quite a while back now is that there's a second phase of development takes place, of kind of cognitive development, specifically related to the pruning of neurons and dendrites, which apparently happens in the teen years. I think it was in Scientific American about 2 years ago. That there's lots and lots and lots of connections, far too many connections, lots of redundant connections in the brain, still beyond the infant years. But during the teen years, up to the early 20s, there's a kind of pruning process that sweeps across the brain from the front to the back, cutting back and culling the unnecessary connections. I think that's a separate video of that one. I'll think about that one. Anyhow, yeah. So I suppose I'm just saying that in terms of alternative explanations for why people would feck a dog, if I can return to that phrase, I don't think we need to look to genetics to explain that, and it wouldn't make any sense to do that, of course, which I don't really think anybody's saying that. But I can kind of imagine it in some of these kind of ways that I've talked about. You know, something like Freud, or something like the plasticity of the developing human brain, and its fragility, how easily broken it is.